player. So we wanted to make something that you really felt like you were trekking out into the wilderness to get there. We had a few different iterations of this that were sparrow runs or pike runs, and I mean internally we called this the pike run for a while, but they didn't really capture that feeling of seclusion and danger and like this intrepid wasteland. So we had to change some things around to make this happen.
Cool. Well, looks like our fire team is heading into the encounter to start. Where did the inspiration for this particular encounter come from?
I mean, there's two big ones for me at least. Others can speak up, but there was the Haunted Wasteland from Ocarina of Time was a big one, just trying to make it so that the area felt expansive and dangerous, but there was actually a really limited path that you could go on, which helped us save some cost too. And that combined with the Thundering Wall from Eater of Worlds, where you had to hide behind certain spots for different moments of the encounter. I don't know, Ray, if you have any other stuff.
I mean, yeah, the Legend of Zelda is definitely something that came up a bunch early on when I think Aaron, I think it was you and Aaron were working on this, trying to figure out like what they wanted, the feeling we wanted to accomplish. And I think having the storm really helped us be able to build this expansive space and not have to fill it with a bunch of stuff. So we could actually have this cool experience of traveling out into the wilderness and into the unknown. And then and then after that, Matt Turner came in and he really knocked it out of the park, making it feel like dangerous and extreme. And he created all these interesting paths, so each journey between each bubble feels different, and there's sort of an escalation of what you're experiencing. So, yeah, I really like
Frank worked on Sandbox. Did a great job.
That's right, Brian Frank.
Now with these bubbles, you see them, there's like these pockets across the encounter. When you're inside them, you feel warm, you feel safe. When you're outside of them, it's like this cold and harsh environment. How do you create two vastly different environments in the same area?
It was a fun challenge, actually, and I'm happy we were able to pull it off, where the outside, so normally when you're up, players are already used to the storm, and in this case, it's actually cranked up even stronger. Like the distance you see is far reduced, the intensity of the weather effects and stuff are all kind of turned up. And then the counter to that is kind of like this warm bubble that you can kind of see that kind of draws you in. And so it originally, actually, the older design pitch was a like cliffside you would kind of hide under, but over time it kind of became these nice warm, like fallen heat shields. So Fallen have kind of set up this camp, and it's kind of like a fallen campfire, so they can kind of stay warm. And the thing that helps sell it too is that when you're inside those bubbles, we actually don't draw any of the particles and stuff that make the weather system what it is. And so you get a very like good contrast between like, all right, I'm safe, it's warm, the lighting has changed, and then when I'm outside, you get all the wind and the particles and dust and stuff kind of flowing through.
Yeah, and just on the audio side too, we have the the whistling storm, and we designed it so once you get that threshold in the bubble, we lower that in the mix so that kind of goes away, and we have kind of a nice warm sound as you come in here. So you have you get that really contrast of like icy cold storm versus this nice warm campfire, and kind of feel the the heat and the warmth of it. So it's that safe place.
Awesome. Now the raid team, you guys usually watch for World's First race, like in the Bungie studio, in our theater. It's a big event, I know, because no one's allowed in the theater except for you guys. What was it like watching World's First with COVID? It's a very different environment.
I mean, it was different, but it was also kind of the same. I mean, obviously everything's different with COVID. And I know personally, like I had a really weird setup. I had one laptop hooked up to my TV to broadcast our internal Twitch stream. Then I had another one hooked up to our team so that I could like converse with everyone and hear everyone's thoughts and react to everyone in real time and sort of share in that same camaraderie that we've always had. It was different, but also not that bad. I don't know what other people
the remote
felt like.
Easier for doing interactions with each other. Like we could share memes, joke about stuff. Where in the theater is much more like the big screen, and you can talk to people around you. But it was a little more personal. Is what it felt like. We could chat a little more. It was on a Saturday too, if I remember, as opposed to the
It's a Saturday.
Yeah, for me, kind of felt like I was. like going from like when we're in the studio, it's kind of like we're at like kind of almost a it's like a party. We're getting to see everyone go through it, the content for the first time, and we're all together. And this was more like we're kind of like watching I guess it's kind of like watching a football game together, since you're in your home and you're kind of all chatting and watching it go down. It was fun, but it's definitely different.
There's
And
so
these
much
are
other
the
added
reasons
thing that was
my favorite.
good.
Like
Like,
just going to the studio and watching that stuff is like one of my favorite days. But it was nice that we were able to still at least try to do something similar to it. And so we had a similar meeting like this where it was just kind of everyone in the same room, kind of hanging out and chatting. And then Hops, he took a picture of everyone in seats almost. So it was sort of like we were there. But I was happy. My Raid Cat, if you haven't seen Raid Cat on my lap, is that she got her Twitter name out there, so she was famous for her day and for the hard work she's put in for her region.
it was also kind of nice because we got to answer questions from people in the studio about like, oh, what was this encounter? Where are they? How much more do they have? What have they figured out? What haven't they figured out? And react to people in real time in that way.
Yeah, seeing reactions too is easy to be shared, where people could just snip a clip, share it, and then the whole chat we could all watch people reacting to stuff was really awesome.
Awesome. So we're about to hit the secret chest. With secret chests, are they planned, or do you build everything out first and then place it in this like area?
I mean, Ray, you can chime in. I feel like it's a little bit of column A and column B.
Yeah, I think we sort of build out the environment, and as the journey kind of comes together, then Jake and I would get together and talk about where we felt like a good place for each of these chests would be. I think for this one, Jake said that it'd be good to have it at the end. That way it kind of encourages players and gives them a reward for going through the entirety of this small encounter at the beginning of the raid. It's kind of like a nice way to put a cherry on top.
Yeah,
especially
making
for
sure
like
that we're not like
constantly guys.
exactly, and it also encourages your teammates to pull you along and make sure you get your reward too.
Or lock you out of the airlock right here.
Yeah, some people are mean. That happens.
Let's send our fire team on through. They can start heading towards our first encounter. This is always an interesting area, this little airlock, because I feel like people show off their sparrows or try and play bumper cards and get somebody killed with a friendly little nudge. Do you guys do that often? Like, this is like a little fun area. Like, let's put a fun house here and just see what people do.
I think it was a little bit. Go ahead, Ray.
I think that's part of like the journey and the pacing. I think is we like to put spots for people to like have those little moments between encounters to sort of talk and have banter between each other in like a lower stress environment. So I think that's kind of one of those things, and we've always done little things to encourage players to sort of poke at each other and, like you said, lock each other in or out of airlocks, or kind of
Yeah, just
interact in ways
social
that are
interactions.
not typically done. Yeah, exactly.
Very cool, very cool. So we're about to enter the Deepstone Crypt. Gorgeous from the outside. Looks very ancient, very old. But when we go inside, it's an entirely different story. And we'll see that in a moment. One of the things I love about the Deepstone Crypt is that it's such an ancient old place because our guardians are freshly rezzed, and this is golden era, and we haven't been there before. Like that's so long ago. What's it like creating an environment that is so old yet so pristine and cutting edge and feels so new?
I think it's interesting. I think we tend to lean on natural palette stuff. Like we have an idea that nature is ascendant over all this technology, and I think that helps sell the age of it and makes it feel ancient, but we can still use cool sci-fi tech like aesthetics, things like the exo palette that Ethan Shu had built out here for us look amazing and techy, but when we get outside we can cover it with ice and snow drifts, and it sort of makes it feel old and a little more ancient.
Yeah, it was really nice being able to go to a place that wasn't decrepit and like torn apart quite as much when you get deep inside of it, right? Like, everything's always usually been overgrown, and for this time you get to experience like some nice, slick, fresh stuff.
Yeah, narratively,
This
we were
looks like
super
much.
excited about kind of showcasing like a snapshot of these environments in regards to like what humanity left behind, like these pristine places that kind of just became like uninhabitable to them within moments, and they had to get away from it. So it's important to us to sort of showcase how these places have just sort of sat in silence for a long time without being disturbed.
Yeah, awesome. So we're about to hit our first encounter, which is a security encounter, and we're being introduced roles into this raid. We have scanner and we also have operator. How do you go about making these roles, and what's the fantasy you're trying to fulfill with them?
So for this raid, we really wanted to go hard science, get back to some of the sci-fi roots. And I mean, Frank had this comment that he made early on that I really liked, which was putting the space back in space magic. We kind of took that to heart. Tried to go with some more cyberpunky stuff, like talking about what it would be like to work in this area, and how we could align different raid mechanics to different roles that you might have. Like, I think early on, the dev names for everything were hacker for scanner, and then there was engineer for operator, and security for suppressor. And we really wanted to just try and dive in on like cybernetic augments and get some of that interesting sci-fi flair back.
Just going to point this out. I think. Oh, go ahead.
It was interesting as a boss designer. One of the opportunities, roles that we get to lean on something that a player's got that's kind of solid. You know, a lot of this game, players are allowed to bring in whatever tools they've got. You know, maybe it's a bunch of Titans, maybe a bunch of Hunters, and so sometimes it can be challenging when building enemies to like, oh, I'm going to challenge a player that has a very specific thing going on. And with this, we were able to do that a little bit, you know, as we'll see later, interacting with the bosses. So that was nice, being able to play off it, something new to try.
I will say the name hacker is way cooler than scanner, and I kind of wish we had kept that way. But that's neither here nor there. Let's give this encounter a start. So when you create these roles and they have these icons over your head, what is it like creating an effect like that is so easily readable across the room?
Yeah, they're challenging because you want them to look nice, but at the end of the day, it's the player messaging that matters most, and so they need to read for what they do in the game. And it's always more complicated when you have multiple that are similar, but trying to like convey different messages. And so we lean pretty heavily on iconography. Dima did a pretty big pass on all of the exo type palette, and you'll see it in new environments and that kind of stuff as well. So they're on the wall, but then we're also using them on there's like these like space kiosks that the players go and deposit and grab their ATM. And from there, it's just at the end of the day, it's a symbol that represents what the role is, and then when you pick it up, you know, it's reinforced by icons on your screen and that kind of stuff. And because we never really know your player distance, and you want it to be readable from far away, we do like little tricks. They're simple, but they help. Where at further distances, those icons scale up to a certain size, slightly larger, and then as you approach them, they kind of scale back down to just try to help you, like at a distance and at a glance, know that that symbol is there, it's ready for you, which one it is.
Very cool, very cool. This encounter is super heavy on callouts. I know all raiders do different callouts. For example, I know a lot of players for Ribbon do L1, L2. My team, like Heretics, we count 1 through 10. What are some internal callouts the raid team uses for these kind of encounters?
So Garrett Jones did a great job with the design on this encounter. We had a bit of a struggle internally. We always make our callouts way harder on ourselves than they ever need to be, and then the community comes in later and makes things super easy, and we realized, like, I don't know what we were doing the entire time. Downstairs, we switched everything by pipes and server side, and then numbered 1 to 5 from front to back. But front to back means different things for different groups, and it can be reversed based on who you're playing with, so that can be a little confusing. And then we also had, we were trying to call pipes and server side left and right, and we also tried left and right, which, you know, did not work out because of the entrance to the space. And at one point, the dark side was like way higher, so we called that high and low. But it just sort of evolved as we were continuing to play through. And then, the community does light and dark, which is like just so simple and easy. I can't believe we didn't use that internally.
So this next question is kind of payback for my clanmates dancing on my corpse in Nightfalls. Am I a villain for locking them in this fire basement of death?
Never.
Because I feel like they deserve it sometimes. Okay, great.
Yeah.
How did you guys get
Set
that
on fire.
visceral feeling though, of being on fire? Because that's super hard to do in video games. Super hard to make it feel like you're actually in danger down there.
It's difficult anytime you have to fill, especially really large volumes with effects, that if you want to drop frame rate real fast, put poor effects or large effects in a room and you'll destroy it in no time. And so you have to really like think about those types of events and how you're going to approach it so that it looks good, it messages what it needs, and it can actually like be performant. And in this case, it's mostly like leaning on lighting. So we did really large volumetric lights that kind of fill the area. And then the particle work is actually more like a secondary, tertiary element. And then we do a little bit on the player screen as well to reinforce like you are the one that's on fire, and this room is like glowing hot. And then also, we always try to find inspiration for what is the source of the flame. So if you're ever in the downstairs part of that bunker, and if you're looking up, there's like these little nozzles on the ceiling that, like when it's activated, there's like flames coming out of those. But at the end of the day, it's mostly leaning on lights to do like a drastic change between what it was and now it's on fire, and so now it's like really warm and hot. And also one of the nice things about that is if you're one of the other players up top as like an observer, you can look through the windows that help you like call out the locations, and you can watch your friend just get toasted. So that's always added bonus.
Yeah, the interesting thing too is we like for the audio for that to match that. Actually, it's only on the player, so only the player that's getting roasted hears it. So no one outside of that actually will hear that. So it's like their own little. They might be going like, "I'm on fire, I'm on fire." And the other little note that I would call it, it's like right before you get toasted, there's little beeps that will indicate your time's going down. So if you're playing with Nigel, that's like you know that Nigel has locked you in, and you're doomed to die right before that happens.
I'll raise you eventually. We'll get there. The Deep Stone Crypt has some very cool, very exclusive perks. We just got some loot. Our Guardians just got some loot. I want to specifically look at recombination and reconstruction. I know we don't have anybody from the Sandbox team here today with us, but Jake, can you speak a little bit more to those perks and how they were designed and how they fit the theme of the Deep Stone Crypt?
Yeah, I can paraphrase Victor Anderson's words pretty well. Hopefully, we'll see. He's telling me that the 3 perks were made at a pretty rapid pace, and they just happened to get a bit of free time. And they hadn't really planned on making raid perks, but they got excited about the raid and started to work. And due to some of the infusion rules, got a little bit more room to breathe for the legendary weapons. So they wanted to kind of harken back to Vanillity 2 with Lunafactions and Rally Barricade, where you felt like you had an unlimited magazine, but try to keep it somewhat reasonable. And so that's kind of where Reconstruction came from, with hybridizing autoloading holster and overflow. And then for the sniper and slug shotgun, slug shotty, which had just gotten a buff, they were excited about trying to do something with that and try to consolidate all of these interesting damage bonus perks into one single solitary event. And that's sort of where the other perks came from. And then as far as theming goes, they initially had a name that was slightly different. There was regrowth, refocus, and recombination. But they wanted to keep it feeling like it was related to the exo facilities. They changed it to reconstruction. And they really just wanted to keep the prefix so that they felt like they were part of a contiguous set, which I think worked really well. And those weapons are awesome. They did a great job.
Yeah, I'm looking
Players
for a
like
reason
to
to put them these days. I think we missed it here, but there's usually a call out, especially if you're an Exo Guardian here, where the AI is like, "Hey, welcome home, welcome home. You're an Exo." We have these cute. This is a cute little nod. We've seen these a couple times before. Are we planning to do more of these in the future? Because I know players love hearing about their accomplishments and what's going on around them.
Yeah, we look for opportunities pretty much everywhere we can to kind of give the players sort of individual experiences based on some of the choices that they've made, and those are not as easy to find within Destiny since it's a fairly curated experience, but yeah, overall that's our intention. We did it in the Dreaming City, we did it here with the Exos, and we plan to do it as much as we can in the future as well.
Awesome.
Real quick,
Go ahead.
Gotta say thanks to Andrew Hops and Aaron Canaday for working on that world art for that Fusion counter space. That was the first encounter, codenamed Fuse.
Awesome. One of the things I want to talk about the statue here. We've seen it a few times before. Pyramid ships, the Garden of Observation, and now here. I'm dying to know why Clovis Bray has this Halloween Home Depot-esque darkness statue in his basement. I really want to know. What is it? Please, Adam, just tell me everything you can about this thing.
Well, the cool thing for people who like kind of read the lore and such, is that you can kind of start to piece together a lot of the like what was Clovis Bray up to, and why did he have this darkness statue, and seemed to have it, for reasons that were related to trying to bring the EXO to life. In regards to what it actually is, I'm not going to say anything about that right now. But there's something really cool about it, which is if you get up close to this one in particular, you will see and notice that it's kind of breathing, and that it's kind of moving, and that it might actually be maybe alive in some form. And then, Evan, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you also can hear some of the whispers as well that you might have heard in the past.
Yes, in fact, these are actually the same whispers that you hear in the pyramid ship from Shadowkeep. So we definitely want to add that, and that's definitely intentional. So yeah, that's about all I can really say about that. There are whispers.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of excitement from like the narrative team on this one, because we planted this in the collector's edition lore book, but we didn't really describe or explain exactly what it was, and it was really fun to see the community kind of rally behind trying to figure that out before they were able to enter the Tombstone Crypt and actually see it with their own eyes.
Also, I want to call out just because I think it's so cool. And when Ray put this in, there's like this kind of like almost bubble around it. You can see that's kind of surrounds that, like there's an actual field there. Which, personally, I think that's just this cool little detail that creeps me out, but it's really cool.
That was super awesome. And I remember when we were looking at the space early on with Ray, that I was just like every time we came back to see it again, I was more and more impressed with like how frightening it looked, and how surreal it kind of looked.
I think Thad did the lighting for it, and I think that really kind of helped tie everything together. I think it really, it kind of highlights all the cool stuff about it, and makes it feel very spooky. I kind of did the same thing with
particular.
Oh.
Go ahead, Ray.
All right.
Oh, no, that's fine. It's not important.
Let's keep moving forward. We're going to see a character we've seen only in a cutscene before in Beyond Light. Atrax. First time we see her, again, she's normal fallen at Lixney. Next time we see her is here, and she's an EXO. What's it like taking a fallen character and then turning them into an EXO? I think that's some concept art.
I mean, at least on the narrative side, we were like super stoked on this idea, and I don't remember who actually pitched this out, but we were trying to figure out what we could do with Atrax in this space and the role that Atrax could play in the Deepstone Crypt. And as soon as that kind of like became a reality, the sort of implications for like we're seeing the first EXO that are not just human, and it sort of like gives us a bigger opportunity space for the future when it comes to the Fallen, when it comes to just EXO in general, and the kind of places in which that tech might pop up. But it was really awesome to be able to see Atrax in motion as an EXO. I was really excited. Tried to put as much Atrax as an EXO into lore as I could, or in other places in the game.
Yeah, that definitely translated into working on the boss itself. We spent a lot of bucks essentially on some of the experiences to help sell that experience. So, for example, when Atrax is rematerializing around a Guardian, if you don't get those bits out the airlock, she will rematerialize over your corpse and just like regenerate to kind of help sell that story of this is beyond just what they used to be. It's no longer just a fallen boss, and just kind of also selling that experience of what does it mean to have this character that has been able to like duplicate itself, create all these kind of hive mind things going on. And normally on an experience that isn't supposed to happen, like, ideally players don't see that beat. Ideally you go through the encounter, you do all your stuff correctly, you throw all the stuff out the airlock and you win. But So as a result, players don't generally see that piece. So we normally wouldn't spend that much on it, but it was so important to like sell the fantasy of this character that we thought it was just really cool to have. Yeah, well, if the boss just rematerializes through you and kills you, it's pretty cool to work on. Very difficult tech-wise,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah, I mean, early on we knew the fantasy for this was going to be like a boss with many bodies, something that can always come back and rematerialize and feel dangerous. And we had gone through a few different conversations of like, hey, what is this actually going to look like? How do we build this in a way that isn't going to blow out our scope? What's the visual language for this? And somebody, I think it was Sheik, mentioned in a meeting, yeah, like, can this just be an EXO? And we're like, yes, please. Yes, please. Can we make this happen? And then everyone got really excited about it, and then here we are.
Do we have a prototype we could look at? Because I feel like this is a fight that's had many iterations and it's evolved drastically from where it started.
Yeah, we have a few prototypes. So early on, this one is a bit buggy. We had these crates that you'd pick up, and those would create a little like fake hologram behind you, which is that like purple pink cylinder that you see with no working shader. But there was an issue where like it wouldn't remove from you properly when you'd shoot at it. So, but it would still create the thing on the ground. And so here we just have hundreds of crates. And at one point, I don't have it on video, but somebody I'm pretty sure was standing on like a tower of 10 crates, and then they just sort of all collapsed to the ground. It was kind of ridiculous. But I mean, that's game development.
Sometimes with prototype placeholder goes too far.
Yeah. I'm glad we got it working eventually. And then we have another one too that Ray started to put together, where we wanted to have Atrex like glowing behind you. The dev name was Replix. And so we took this little monster thing and made it into a mesh. It's so goofy and I love it.
Yeah, it was a real challenge figuring out the experience of shooting it. We were stuck between a rock and a bit where when this thing's attached to you, either it's going to inherit all of your motion directly, so like as players are running around, it would be whipping around left and right and be kind of hard to shoot. We tried something more like a spring that would like track, but over time, but that just looked even weirder. It was like this weird rubber band thing going on. The way we ended up settling on was closer to the former, inherits your motion, but we built it such that it doesn't look quite as silly as this, like following a player around, while still, trying to sell that this is a dangerous thing, this is something you got to shoot, this is something that is going to kill you if you don't get rid of it. It was definitely a challenge.
Yeah,
I mean, it looks really
those effects
cute.
on that are incredible. Yeah.
The little placeholder looks really cute, and I would befriend him in a heartbeat. I mean, we befriended Crow. I don't see why we can't befriend this one.
Exactly.
He looks like a friend. That's just what I'm saying.
He just wants to give you a hug.
Yeah.
All right, let's head back to our fire team and let's get this encounter started. So this is a really cool play space, especially with where our camera is about to go in a second. This reaction of going up the elevator and into space, sorry for the spoilers if you guys have not seen this before, the community's reaction was really wild, especially Rex's. How do you guys react to these exciting moments, like internally? Are you guys like posting memes with each other? Are you laughing and giggling, or you're like, oh man, I didn't expect that to happen?
Yeah, it's like one of the best parts of the job, honestly. Like, I love, you can kind of start to predict where things might get a reaction out of players, but you never really know, like, how people will click with stuff. And so seeing that stuff live, going up the elevator up to space was just great. I love seeing that emotion out of players.
Yeah, I mean, that was
Usually a few days after.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I think usually a few days after, everyone who's been kind of scouring the internet finds all their favorite links from those events as well. And then usually there's a thread that goes out that just has all these links of everyone's favorite kind of reactive moments to these types of events. So they get shared around pretty fast and pretty much everywhere inside the studio.
Yeah, and I mean, this encounter was codenamed Transit, so we knew early on, like, we were going to be going back and forth from what we called the base space and the space space, which didn't make things confusing internally at all. But we knew that this was going to be an exciting moment, and we wanted to put a bunch of money into it and make it something that was really memorable. And I had been waiting for raid launch for this moment specifically for a really long time. I couldn't be happier with how everyone reacted to it. There's so many great videos of it.
And the
Adam,
community
this
did
was
not
kind of
disappoint me with usually the community comes up like they see weird things like this and they try to figure out weird math skills, and someone came out with like the velocity that the Guardian had to be going to get there in like 10 seconds or whatever it was.
How many G's
How they would
you'd
pretty much
be hitting?
maybe like a puddle up on the seat.
Adam, when we first got up here, the Clovis Bray called this area calamitous. Did you expect that to become like a big meme throughout Reddit and the rest of the world?
I did not this time around, largely because probably like I didn't playtest it enough to notice it when we were actually building it. But the thing is, like in general, we are trying to be aware of those things, and we do we have like a lot of events like strikes and stuff sometimes where we'll just cut the dialogue out when you're playing it for the second, third, fourth, and on times, so that we can avoid kind of stuff like that. But I will say, I love that this became a meme, and I think it's all fun and it fits. So it feels good. I feel like people actually look forward to hearing it now, even if it's like the 900th time.
It's less frustrating when you're not on contest mode.
Exactly. With bosses, they're always accompanied by non-boss combatants. They can often shape the encounter just as much as the boss does themselves. How do you decide which of those combatants go into an encounter?
There's a ton of factors that go into it. For starters, we try to never have a combatant that shares a combatant type with the boss, just because that gets confusing. And we try to isolate weapon types where we can, so that you can more clearly identify which combatant is which based on what weapon they're using. And then I think it also comes down to, like, do we need something to punctuate a beat of the encounter? Do we need an anchor here? Okay, what's the boss that we're using? What anchor can we supply here that will make sense? And here, the cases of servitors. And then if we want something else to make a call out, then we'll try and put some range threat in that you have to deal with, otherwise it'll be kind of a pain, which is where those sniper shanks came from.
Yeah, it's a highly collaborative effort. Based on the boss side, I work on designing how the boss itself interacts with players and whatnot, while Jake and more of the raid team figure out the encounter and how things flow left and right. A big thing here was because we were going to have so many of her bodies, the A-tracks just everywhere. The weapon that we ended up giving her is that shock rifle, which isn't the most lethal of them, but if I made it any more lethal, it would have been pretty brutal. If she was wielding some kind of shrapnel launcher and you had all these bodies like walking around immune, you can't hurt them, just wrecking your day, it might have been a little much. So it definitely takes collaborative effort to balance that stuff out. The other thing I wanted to touch on is the damage kind of transitioning in this boss fight was pretty complex. There was a particular bug that we saw in Chip where we'd see the health bar rubber banding, and what was actually happening there is a little more nuanced. It's not that it is undoing damage. It's like in our game, we feel like a single player shooter, but there's a lot of work that goes into that because you're actually not a single player game. You're playing online over a network, but you're not getting that like MMO delay to what you're seeing. And what's happening there is like the health bar is reporting something that didn't actually occur yet. It also kind of goes down to there's that boss in the closet that the community was able to locate. More or less, there is a greater Atrax mind, and that was kind of a stand-in for what it is, because it's actually pretty complicated. It's not just like there's X bosses and they have X health. There's variability. When you kill a boss, you actually get to do additional DPS. There's a lot of this back and forth. And kind of simplifying that by having a single unit where that was being combined into, it made it possible, more or less.
Yeah, we really wanted to make sure that we were respecting player sandbox and that you felt like you didn't have to count the number of boss bodies that you had to kill before you were able to complete the encounter.
Yeah, it's super important to
annoying.
leave it open to players to figure out how to do that, right? Like we do define what we want players to do in that experience, but this is a game. You're here to express yourself and figure out how you want to go and approach a problem. So leaving that open rather than being like, well, you have to do X times and do X things is a little too rigid for the way we like to do things.
I think we've got another prototype.
Awesome, let's take a look at it.
So this is an early prototype of the drop pod. Darren Lindsay put this together with some help from Eric Castles. It's really early, obviously, but the experience is still there, and this was really cool to see early on and get the feeling and get people excited when they were looking at it for how the encounter is going to feel. And as you can see, this is with no enemies in the space or anything going on, but yeah, I'm really happy with the work that he put in to make this happen. It's some crazy behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, I just want to say the audio on this one. We were really inspired, like that the idea of like put space back in Space Magic. I think we listened to a lot of Saturn V rocket launches. We could have done it really super high tech and made a really subtle sound as you kind of rise up, but we wanted to really make it feel like you're in an actual rocket launching and have that visceral feeling of going, like the realistic going into space. And so that's having that kind of NASA kind of feel to it more than having this ultra high tech futuristic thing. And visuals are amazing, of course.
Yeah, of course. The whole fire coming up around you while you go up and then kind of goes away as soon as you get to the top. It's absolutely amazing. Let's get our fire team to keep on moving. They're going to one of my favorite areas in the raid. We're going to take a stop to listen to some absolutely amazing music. I don't think this is probably like some of the best our audio team has put out in terms of musical composition, in my opinion. It's going to be the Deep Stone Lullaby, which everyone loves. It's such a massive tone shift when we get in there. We're going to take a listen, and then I want to just ask, why was it chosen for sequence? How do you get like such a powerful piece in this part of the raid, and why?
We got some work to do.
I'm always the straggler in my group, so this is always cleared by. So I'm always like, oh yeah, I'll just run on through.
Personally, I also find it strange that right at this moment is the point where you've gotten killed. You can get killed in these the same kind of doorway, and that this time you're going out to it, and all of a sudden something getting killed. It's a really different experience.
Mm-hmm.
Damage you will be responsible for today. Do not fool yourselves. This facility is not simply the fruitless work of some pathetic scientist. This house was built by the genius Clovis Bray I himself. Within lies humanity's salvation. La Fontaine du Jouvence. Made possible by clarity control. Magnificent, wasn't it? An entity from beyond our own dimension. And the answer to humanity's eternal struggle.
It's interesting about this piece. Yeah. Just going to say about this piece. So when our music team works, we've got a great. I mean, I'm always impressed with our music team. Every release, they always just do an amazing job. So one of the things when the music team works, they work pretty fairly early on a release and try and come up with themes and ideas that fit that release. So it's a very collaborative effort among all of our composers and developing themes and melodies. In this instance, the melody was composed by Michael Seacrest, but the entire music team actually worked on this piece. And kind of like the general idea behind the piece is kind of interesting, where it the idea of why it's a lullaby, at least internally for them, thinking of it as like it's kind of like representing this tone poem of going from a human to an exo. So the idea that you start off as a human and then you go to sleep and then you wake up as an exo, and that's kind of this piece's idea of going from that shift from human to exo. And I think a lot of times when we're doing this, we're trying to figure out like where this piece was written and like where it fits in, and definitely a big collaboration with the raid team, with narrative, to try and figure out how we can kind of make this moment. And for us, we really wanted this to be a specific moment and elicit this emotional response. And at least for me personally, it's very kind of humbling and gratifying that people have latched onto this and really feel like this is a really impactful and emotional moment for a player. And a lot of that it is the music, but I also like to point out that it's the pacing, it's how the design flows into it, and it's not just kind of one thing. From the audio team perspective, we're very very proud of like how music and sound design and dialogue kind of all work together to kind of create this impactful experience.
Yeah, it's an awesome moment because it really gives you the opportunity to kind of like sit there and take everything in, and you can like pay attention to the dialogue, but you can also really just feel like a sort of sense of serenity kind of while you're looking at everything. And it was actually really like, Jake and I spent a lot of time looking for the best places to put dialogue and narrative in the raid where it's not going to be super distracting. And this ended up being, one of the prime places, and the very first time that the Crypt AI starts talking to you as who it actually is Clovis Bray.
Nice.
Yeah, and I mean the serenity and stuff comes into play more too, like when after wiping for 10 hours on Atrax and finally beating it, you're like just basking in the music.
This area in particular is really cool for me. It's one of the first times I think our Guardians are fighting in space. Usually we're like, oh, we're around space, we're near space, we're never in space. What was it like designing an area like this? Because there's got to be a lot of work for audio and traversal just to make it feel like you're in space.
I think when we first started, when we decided we were going to go to space and we were going to do a space station, I think it was pretty clear. I think Brian Frank even said it, that if we didn't do a spacewalk, we pretty much had failed ourselves. Like, it's something we had to do. And I think as far as like laying out the journey like through space, it kind of all revolved around, for me, the showing off the skybox and the work that Eric Castles did, because if we had you walking across the top of a space station, you'd mostly just be seeing the space station. So I think that kind of drove this idea that jumping around underneath it was more interesting, because you're constantly looking for the platform, and the platform's so tiny, so it gives you this chance to really admire the space outside and see everything that Eric had done. That really makes you feel like you're in space. And then we kind of kicked around the idea of, was it worth it without changing the gravity? And I think early on I'd said that would not be a good reason not to do it, so we should just go ahead and try. See how it feels. And I think once everyone got in there, especially once the music and the skybox was finished, it became clear that it was totally one of the cooler moments in the raid. So they definitely did a great job.
Yeah, and we kind of along that of trying to figure of that balance of audio. You trying to sell the idea you're in a vacuum, and that's a much different kind of sound design. And so we also a lot of audio. Our audio really it informs the sandbox of what you're doing, and you're hearing your weapon and all your abilities and all these things. But we wanted to try and sell it. This was a different and kind of localized space and experience. So we did spend some time trying to come up with this kind of balance of let's kind of make it like it would be real, but not exactly. So you can hear your weapon, but it's muted. Probably one of the biggest things we do every time you fire your weapon, actually there's lots of different, people may not know this, but there's lots of different sounds that all mix together to give that weapon sound fire. And almost in every environment in Destiny, when you fire your weapon, you can actually hear it kind of reverberate around the environment. But we specifically went into space, and we actually remove that. So when you're in space, you don't, of course, there's no air, so you have none of that reverberation, and that kind of helps sell that experience of I'm in a vacuum, or I'm in a space environment, and really trying to help sell that experience.
All right. Wait, looks like we've got a prototype to show. Jake, can you speak on this one over here? Where is this?
Yeah, this is a old tone piece that Ray put together, showing the player journey throughout the raid. It's a little long, but it shows how far things came. I don't know when this was built, Ray.
Yeah, we built this for I think it was just an internal meeting where people were kind of like, can we show everyone who's not on the team what how the raid's coming along, what you guys are making, kind of a tone feel for it. There's a lot of stuff that's missing, but it's potentially just a tone piece, and also to show the pacing and what we were thinking. So you'll see a lot of early stuff, and kind of see the bones of where everything came from, which is kind of neat.
That's the old Taniks sarcophagus.
Tanik's old pod.
I always love looking at the prototypes because it shows you can see where different parts come from, and it's always great to look from the before and the after. Do you guys keep up drawings of specific prototypes or things around your workspace, I guess, now instead of the office, just to kind of inspire you guys?
I don't have a lot of old stuff kicking around. That's not. Yeah, it took me a while to find even this video that I'd put together. But I know that some people who sketch things out more, have notebooks and things full of those kind of things.
Yeah,
For
sometimes
effects
we get
stuff,
lucky
we
with.
use-
Go ahead.
I say for effects, we use there's another software we use where essentially, as we're working on any item, we're uploading all the versions of it as it goes through its process. So you can see, for the most part now, like an effects asset go from kind of like a blockout, like our version of a blockout of an effects, to like a finished one through most items now in Destiny.
Yeah, I mean, we generally don't keep a ton of that stuff around on Ray Design side, but I mean, now we're trying to make more of an effort too for things like this, just because it's fun to look at our old content. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of old crafty stuff, and we had a lot more footage to play around with this time, just due to continually uploading our playtest footage to Shotgun to have people be able to look at and view, since we know you can't have 15 people, 20 people in a playtest lab during COVID. So that gave us a lot more to work with this time around.
Cool. So we're heading up on the next encounter, which is the orbital descent. We have a new role, the suppressor. What's the fantasy behind this one in particular? Because it's very different than the other two.
So with the other two, we looked at, using hidden information, being able to see things that are important for your fire team, and interacting with objects of various types. And here, because we knew that we wanted to add a third augment for the final two encounters, and because we knew we were having a boss in the final two encounters, we were like, okay, well, like obviously this has to be something with the boss. So we really wanted to make it feel like you were integrated more into the environment, and like you were part of the security system, and making sure you could neutralize threats, and doing stuff of that nature. That's sort of where a lot of the stuff came from. It's just, how does this fit into the rest of the encounter design? What can we make sense here? And what's in scope? And I mean, honestly, also what's fun? How do you get more of that fun Destiny sandbox movement into the game, without neutralizing a bunch of other factors?
Yeah, giving players a reason to interact with the boss is always something, especially when the boss otherwise is not in a DPS state, right? Like, what we always have to avoid is situations where, like, oh, it's time to look at the boss, and then, oh, DPS is over, everybody ignore the boss and go do something else. Like, we usually have to design to make sure that there's the boss has presence and that you're interacting with them. And this suppressor was a great way to do that, is to give you a reason to interact with them, so that there's a lot more of a back and forth interaction going on.
Yeah, Chris Manfrin was the initial designer for this encounter and came up with the suppressor gameplay. And he did a great job on this, and then handed it over to Garrett Jones to finish out. This is the Titanic encounter. And it's funny that this is called Descent now, because the code name for the raid was Raid Descent. But random little tidbit.
So the internal name was Titanic. That to me is already like a really funny name. Do all the internal names for encounters match each other with the encounter design, or is it just sometimes like this is called pepperoni and that's it?
We try to find one like core irreducible thing about the encounter that won't change no matter what goes on in the encounter. And so for here, like we knew early on that after trying to like figure out where we could crash the space station, that this is going to be the encounter where the space station's crashing. And so Chris was like, okay, well, I know what to call it, Titanic. And I was like, done, let's do it.
Well, I think our Guardians are ready to get this going. So one of the things that happens in this fight is you're rapidly descending back to Europa. How do you make that happen in a place like this? Because you see the fire coming out of the windows and other things, but there's got to be more to just than just like, oh look, you're falling in the background.
It's probably one of the most highly collaborative parts of the raid, if I had to guess. We essentially, anytime we identify large moments like this, we try to put like we call just like a little strike team, so like that team's iterating and looping and staying in sync with each other, because it doesn't fall on one team to make an experience like this actually work, either technically, artistically, design, like all of it. And so a lot of it was just getting like the big story beats down first. Of like, all right, we have to crash this ship. What does that mean? How are we going to go about doing that? And I think Cass again came up with a prototype early on with, you can see like the planets kind of starting to drift in the sky. And from there, that was kind of like the big starting point of like, all right, like a technical hurdle has been achieved. We can like keep moving forward and layering on top of that. But like once that big beat was in and understood, other people could layer on the effects and lighting change. And again, another one with this is the space changes drastically, but a lot of it is on a key light changing to make it feel hot and warm and that kind of thing from when it was just like its pristine version. And then we layer on like nice smaller elements of like there's little panels like flying off and there's sparks starting to burst and like just building on what was the main beat of like, is that the planet? Am I drifting towards it? Oh, we're drifting towards the planet, right? Like just letting that start to sink in, and then you see all these other elements start layering on top. And a lot of that, it's a lot of iteration with quite a few people to dial it in.
I think
Yeah, this is. I'm trying to think of how many people were in there. Oh, go ahead.
There's one other small interesting piece is that we wanted to make sure that the space station crashed as you progress through the encounter. So it's not just like it's running through like a 10-minute sequence of the station crashing. So there are beats in the encounter where we do things like those blast shield doors come down so that the sky position of the planets in the sky can be moved into place for the next reveal of the planet, so you can feel closer based on where players are in the encounter. So as they complete things, then the doors close, and as they complete more and they hit a certain milestone, then the panels start flying off, and then they complete the next milestone. The fire masks the next transition. So it was kind of, we realized early on that players are going to get really good at this, and if they were going to finish it very fast, it would make sense that the planet had only moved like 10% of the crash, and then the encounter was over and we're pretending they're crashing. So we had to figure out ways to pace the experience with how fast you were completing the encounter.
Yeah, the world
I was
became
going to say that it was
right?
large. So what was that?
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say this is a really large effort, and like I know, like again, of like I'm trying to think of like this encounter. I'm trying to think of a lot of things we've done where the amount of different disciplines that had to kind of get together and do lots of different kind of crazy tricks to make it all kind of seem like a seamless thing. To me, it was like I'm trying to remember if I've actually worked on a singular encounter that had that many people, and it was like our strike team. Usually, strike teams are not even small teams. This was actually a really large strike team, and so lots of different people working in and trying to figure out, well, how do we all make it work together seamlessly and like hit each beat. And I guess I think internally there was an idea of like having this be in this idea of like phases, so it's not like this purely time thing, obviously, but there's big beats that you can hit throughout the whole encounter and really understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I mean, we made changes on the encounter side too to try and make sure that like you're actually paying attention to the window sometimes, because we wouldn't want to make this cool event and then have people have no reason to look at it. So that's kind of where some of the shanks came from, to float up above in the arena, and why the boss moves back to that central platform in the back to just keep reframing all the cool art that everyone's made.
Very cool, very cool. I feel like this encounter in particular is a free-for-all for loadouts for Guardians. You can really flex your muscles, do whatever you really feel like, with whatever kind of goofy loadout or meme build you want to do. Was our encounters designed from the ground up with that in mind, or is it something that happens during iteration?
I mean, when it's a non-boss encounter, we generally try to allow for people to use whatever loadouts they want and make it more sandbox heavy, and really like just make sure that whatever you're doing, as long as you're slaying things, you're doing a good job. And I mean, there's generally, some of the encounters that we build, we try to make specific call-out combatants, where like, oh, snipers are up top, make sure to take these over, and that's where some of the melee captions came from, was to harass people that are trying to deposit when they're right up next to it before the suppressor's done their job. I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. A lot of people just sword them to death. I mean, falling guillotines is still pretty good, so that's generally what I do when I'm playing. I don't know.
I personally usually use Lament the entire time. I'm just like, I'm gonna keep the sword on and just slash some people. But it is also fun because you can use different weapons. Like I've been using the new rocket launcher from this season, and that's always fun to kind of blast someone's head and give them like a little unicorn horn, and watch them walk around trying to stab you. We're getting towards the end of this encounter, and the Clovis AI gives us this very cryptic warning, and it's very odd for at least me as a player, To find somebody so hostile out there, because we're usually the good guys, we're guardians, we help defend humanity, and this person's like, you're a threat. Why is he like that?
Clovis Bray has a lot to lose here. And when we sort of pop in, he sees anybody that's coming into Stone Crypt space as a threat. And since the way that the Fallen kind of broke into the Deep Stone Crypt was kind of in secret, didn't like spur him to kind of wake up. But as soon as we come in and we break the sort of security system early on, it triggers him to come on, and he just naturally is going to try and save his entire creation, everything that he's ever built. So this was like always a failsafe for him. The space station was always designed to like be loaded with nuclear tech that could just annihilate the entirety of Europa, and basically if I can't have it, nobody can.
Fair point. So we've crashed. We're in a lot of pain. You see when we first come back, we have that like black and white in the screen. How do you create a moment like that says you crashed?
It's one of the ones that's a lot of disciplines, right? Like it's audio, speeding it down, it's lighting, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's a lot of. I mean, I also this was a big technical challenge too. Just in terms of trying to get. I mean, I tell you, I remember lots of work trying to get this down because there's lots of situations that you have to kind of account for. Like, did you make it into the safe room? Did you not make it into the safe room? Did you die right beforehand? And trying to get all of those in to kind of be a cohesive experience.
Right.
Yeah,
And we also
I
are
guess the
like,
answer is it's difficult.
and we're teleporting people right as that crash happens too, which doesn't make things any easier.
Yeah, I mean, I know for us, just trying to get a crash sound, like getting that to trigger consistently when we wanted it to, and the wake up, that was it's a lot of effort to kind of do that, and also sell the crash of like you're actually plummeting to the surface, and we have a lot of great audio that's in there. The interesting thing too, like audio and music for that whole end run are exactly timed. There's a time limit we try and hit, so you have it plays out, and if it were somehow to go a little longer, all of a sudden everything would stop and come to a halt, and it wouldn't be that exciting. So trying to get all that timing in was very very challenging.
All right, let's have our guardians move on forward through this next little area, which I love. But when we come out, we're going to come and see a familiar area. I think we've already been here before. Correct me if I'm wrong when we pop our heads out.
No, that is correct. That's something we thought would be interesting to try to do early on, was sort of end the raid kind of close to where you began it. Kind of this interesting little bookend thing. But Aaron Canaday did both of these spaces. I think he did a good job of kind of preserving what was there, but also adding in enough stuff to make it feel like the space station had crashed here. So, I think it worked out pretty well. I think initially, Jake, we had hoped to have the first encounter was supposed to be out in front of the Deep Stone Crypt rather than inside, but we moved it inside when we sort of figured out what we wanted it to be and what kind of the things we wanted to do with it. Just made more sense for it to be inside. So,
right, I think we have some early concept of that door entrance too.
Oh yeah, we do.
Yeah, I think we do have some concept art. If Stream Master Scott could pull that up for us.
That's of the boss. Yeah.
Well, while we're here, let's talk about the boss.
Yeah, go ahead,
I do think we want to see the entrance later.
Yeah, Taniks was a fun one to work on. He's just this furious, houseless fallen who just refuses to die and just will do whatever it takes. And we had to decide once we understood that this was going to be Taniks and you fought him in the previous encounter, that we have to like one up what's going on there. Like if you just fought Taniks again, like even if we give him all these attacks, all this other kind of stuff, it's not going to feel climactic. But thankfully, if you've met Taniks before, he's not really the type to go down. We were like, okay, what would he do if you crashed in a station after you just got woken up and all this stuff is going down? You have a terrible day. You're like, well, he'll graft himself onto a shank. That sounds like exactly something Taniks would try to do. Originally, we had imagined that there might be a longer time before or when the station crashed to when you saw that to kind of tell that story. And so when you find him here, you get to see him break out after forming all that stuff together. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I also recall very specifically we were still in office, and we had been probably like a month or two already building the Shanix version of this guy when Doom Eternal released some of their early stuff on some of the stuff they're gonna have. And I saw the Doom Hunter, and I was like, oh, here we go. We're gonna have some memes. And sure enough, the community took it pretty well. I like all the memes comparing the two, but I knew early on people were going to think that see that parallel right there. As soon as that was announced, and I was like, we're going to be launching months after them. So, whatever, it's that ship sailed. We're gonna just ride that out. It'll be funny.
So talk to me about this concept art. Oh, so we just flop right off of it, the entrance. Streams are hard, guys.
Sorry.
Yeah, talk to me about this concept art.
This is a piece that we tried to figure out what spot in the raid we wanted concept for, and I think this one became pretty apparent. And I think this piece came from Sung Choi, and he sort of took what we had masked out and sort of helped us figure out what it would look like in the damaged state, and we sort of worked backwards from there. And obviously we had to add some more play space out in front of it to allow you to have a place to encounter the boss and fight, but I think the spirit of it is maintained here. And I think Eric Castles, who did all the skybox stuff again, and Aaron Canaday really interpreted this well. Create a space where you can engage the boss, but still sort of has that sort of chaos and destruction from the space station falling in your front yard.
Yeah, that would be not optimal for most people. Let's get this encounter started, because this is the final one.
I think we got it.
We
got a few Taniks prototypes to show off, I think, too.
Oh, that's way cooler than what I was going to say. Let's look at those prototypes real quick.
So we have, this is the early version of what the DPS looked like. I mean, it's still really cool. Eventually we got these objects rotating, but you can sort of see how things initially worked out. And I mean, over the course of development, we realized, hey, adding too many of these blocks makes it really hard for you to actually concentrate and do what you need to do in damage. And like, we were running into too many situations where people were getting frustrated because they'd do all the hard work and get to DPS finally, and then half the fire team would just get killed by these blocks. So we wanted to preserve some amount of that, while also not making it too frustrating. Some of the inspiration for that came from a bug that we had back in Last Wish, in the vault encounter with that moving cover. There's at one point, the cover would move at like, I don't know, 50 times the speed that it was normally supposed to, and so if you weren't careful when you're trying to go back into the center, it would just annihilate you, and we always called that getting hit by the bus. And I mean, we tried to preserve some of that here where we could, because it's such a fun experience getting launched by physics in the game.
Yeah, it's always a challenge since during DPS, right, is when you want to be focusing on the boss, you want players to be executing on, their builds and doing all that kind of stuff. And so, we want to challenge players when that happens, but at the same time, it's a slippery slope. If you get too far, like some of our other prototypes with this, and you're having to like stop DPS, deal with the thing, then go back to DPS, it doesn't always feel right. And so it took a lot of iteration to get that down pretty well.
And then there was some added complexity when the boss came into the mix for that next video too.
Yep.
I think we have a second prototype to look at. Yep.
Yes, a fun little blooper. This encounter was called Sunder, and Chris Manprim was the designer on this one. And you can see the boss didn't take too kindly to the damage object.
Not even he is safe from the physics.
I'm out. Can we play that just one more time? It's just so wonderful. Peace out.
I don't think I've seen those videos before. That's great. I actually like how they illustrate, though, when you're doing your playtest, how isolated to the mechanic, right? Like, I think a lot of times people might think how far games will be when you're still trying to figure out mechanics and like how much wasted time there could be. But it's like, especially that first video, right? It's gray cubes and it's a boss that's not moving and you're shooting a green sphere, right? Like early on, prove out your mechanics before like art piles in, kind of thing.
Right.
All right, let's head back to our fire team. Looks like
Started.
they're ready to go on this encounter. Do have a couple of questions while we're fighting, but let's get it going from our fire team. So as we can see with our camera, they got a slug shotgun, and some cool kids on the internet told me that slug shotguns are a really cool weapon type for this encounter. Was that a deliberate choice to give the room to shine in this encounter, or was it just like player intuition being like, oh wow, we can actually use this weapon here and this would actually do a ton of damage?
That's
I don't
not
think we
always
specifically knew about. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so we don't always focus explicitly on a particular weapon that we want to do. Like, a lot of times it's more broad strokes. So like, oh, is this a close range fight? Is this a long range fight? You know, stuff like that. Because we don't want to be overly prescriptive on like, oh, you got to bring X gear. That's the only way to do this. That sort of stuff. It was definitely something that when things come together and you identify it, you roll with it. You know, you don't usually want to fight against things that end up being fun. So that was one that came out of things coming together more so than we like set out to make slug shotguns the one true way or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think early on we were kind of frustrated. Not really frustrated, but we wanted to make something different from what we did with Garden of Salvation, where, you know, sitting in a well and using sniper is the best play, as it has been for many of the bosses that we've done previously. So we wanted to try and change up that distance and at least provide more movement during the DPS to make things feel a little bit different. And I mean, that's sort of where some of the changes to the DPS happened for Atrax as well. Just trying to do something a little bit different than how we normally do it.
All right. As we're getting to this DPS phase, I do have to ask, during that moment where the Guardians were shooting the orbs off of Taniks, these purple beams of death kind of drop from the sky. I have nightmares about them from backing into them. What makes you choose specific elements like that are kind of goofy, yet at the same time very like visually, like you gotta dodge this, otherwise you're gonna die?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what's going on there, right? So that attack, the intention of it is that we want players to move and shoot the weak spots. That's the challenge. Is like, it's not just shoot a weak spot, but also continue to move. And so when we're doing that, you know, tuning us meant to, you know, as long as you're doing what you're supposed to do, it's not too bad. Like if you get caught by like the edge of the attack, it's actually not too lethal. It's really only if you get hit square on by that thing that's gonna one-shot you potentially. As for like what it looks like and stuff, originally the idea here of what he's doing is bringing down some of this wreckage down from like orbit that's like falling down. But when we went to build that, that experience doesn't actually have a tell really built in. Like there's no way to really know an asteroid or a chunk of the wreckage is coming flying in. And it's really kind of hard to communicate that was going to occur. And so we moved it also towards like, you know, how is he doing this? Oh, void energy makes the most sense. It's something that he's leveraging here. And so that's where the purple stuff came from. And then a lot of the like, you know, the edge and where is safe, where is not safe, and how do we do all that stuff. We had to like really pound home, like when you're in the zone, when you're not. Partially because, you know, you don't have 360 vision and it's easy to potentially, you know, back into the attack, which is one of the main ways that I see people die to it still, is if you're not looking at it, you don't know it's there. But yeah, I mean, ultimately the fantasy is still that he's throwing stuff down. It's just void energy giving you the warning and whatnot.
All right. These nuclear cores are also like a really big staple throughout the entire raid. Did you know once you made them for Titanic that you wanted to use them also in the final encounter here with Taniks?
Yeah, I mean, some of the fantasy that we've talked about is like the sad death. That Taniks can sort of grafted some of this stuff onto himself in between the third and final encounter. And I mean, we wanted to share as many mechanics and build on them in some way. So the main escalation is that, okay, now you got to do everything you did in the previous encounter, but with the boss on top of it, to make it really highlight the boss in some way.
Yeah, other interesting details that take a little more nuance than you would expect is like when you use the suppressor on the boss and you stun him. You know, it actually takes a lot of animation iteration to get that right, because like what we don't want is for players to like feel guilty or feel bad, right? And like there's a way to animate him, which we had earlier on, that like he's like insane and awful, and you know, in this case it wasn't that bad because Taniks is such a furious, angry fallen that it's not too hard to make him feel like you're, you know, destroying him. When in reality, you really are. Like, when you get good at this encounter, you're just dunking on this guy over and over. We still need to make that feel satisfying and make him a villain. And so he's convulsing, but he's still angry and he's furious. And even if he's not in control of his like shank body at that time, he doesn't sell like he's suffering necessarily. Serious, you know.
Very cool, very cool. We're getting towards the end of our deep dive here, but I do want to talk about this wonderful little loot kiosk we have over here. If our camera person can go check it out for us. What was it like designing this new way of receiving rewards? I know a lot of the community absolutely loves this.
I mean, for us, we really wanted to build something that helped you incentivize playing other raids. We've got a lot of awesome raids on the game right now, but there's not quite as much of a reason to play them. So that's kind of where the Spoils of Conquest came from. And I mean, I know Peter Hood was excited about giving players some amount of agency in their loot drops. And yeah, I mean, giving players more rewards is always something that they're excited about. And I mean, we always want to make players happy too. That's where a lot of this stuff came from.
Will we see it return in the future? Not ready to talk about that.
I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got one last question. The Deepstone Crypt is now open. We've already seen in this season, Kayatel's got some champions looking for the Deepstone Crypt. Is this going to be a continued focal point for our Guardians? Are we going to keep coming back and making sure we are the defenders like Clovis Bray said we would have to be?
I think we left a lot of this intentionally open-ended so that we could return to it if we needed to. But that's kind of about all I can say at the moment.
Interesting. Well, that is it for our Deepstone Crypt Deep Dive today. I'd like to thank everyone who made the stream possible. Scott, everyone who joined us, all of our players, everyone working in the studio. Thank you so much. Let's get a cheers for them in chat. Thank you again to all of our devs. If you want to know more about the Deepstone Crypt, we have an article now live on Bungie.net right now. Go check it out. And if you're hanging around, we're going to go raid as Amaze's stream in a second. Be very kind in their chat, please. And until next time, Guardians, be safe, be brave.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for watching.